Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to another Sunday night edition of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Harris. With me, as always, is Mike Tagliere. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, how you doing, buddy?
I've had better Sundays, being a Bears fan and all. Watching what went down today, because it was just it was a brutal day, man. But it was a good day of football, though. Honestly, like I've thoroughly enjoyed watching this day in football. I have a lot of good takeaways here. I feel like there were some breakout performers. There was some guys whose stock fell even further, and I can't wait to talk about it, man.
Well, look, before you get too down, at least like 3 other teams in the history of football have lost to Brock Osweiler, so don't be too beaten up about it. No, we're going to talk about that game. Unfortunately, we have to, Tags. I mean, you understand. Ordinarily, I just let it pass because I know how you feel as a Jets fan, but we're going to have to dig into it at some point. But for now, let's just start with, other than the Bears, unless that you want them to be your biggest takeaway. What is your biggest takeaway on a really kind of exciting day of football?
That the Jaguars might not be a team that's destined for the playoffs, but at the same time, it's like, looking at that defense, like, it's funny because you watch Dallas in that game jump out to an early lead, and you just like looked at the Jacksonville defenders thinking like, we lost this game. Like, they knew if they had allowed 2 touchdowns in that game that they probably weren't going to win, because Blake Bortles he's not the type of quarterback that's going to bring you back into football games. He's like the type of guy who plays with some confidence if you get him a lead, and then you could kind of run different things. You could run play action where teams have to defend the run, but when you put him in a hole like that, the Jacksonville Jaguars, man, the defense is falling apart. Jalen Ramsey is dinged up a little bit. He's playing through an injury. Leonard Fournette might not come back till after their bye week, we're hearing. So there's a whole bunch of things with that Jaguars team that my biggest takeaway is just that their team might not be what everyone expected them to be, myself included.
Yeah, that was a pretty surprising. They completely blew him out of the water. The Cowboys did. It just ended, I believe, or it might still be going on here as we start recording. But yeah, it was not competitive from the get-go, and that's the thing with the Jaguars. That they're sitting there and thinking, if we get behind, we have almost no chance to win. It's the same thing that happened last week with Kansas City. And Bortles really, Tags, you mentioned it last week. Do you think there is a chance that Blake Bortles gets benched at some point this season?
It's going to be tough to do it. The contract extension that they gave him, like they'd have to eat a lot of dead cap this offseason if they did choose to release him. So, I think they're tied into him for a long time. But at the same time, it's like, how long can this go on? Where it's like, if your defense just gives up a couple touchdowns and all of a sudden your game is over, like I'd be curious to see the numbers. I don't have those in front of me. I don't keep track of this stuff, but I know there's guys out there who actually do. I'd like to know how many times Blake Bortles has come back from 10 points down, because I don't know if I ever see that happen.
Yeah, that's fair. But is the backup Cody Kessler?
It is Kessler,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like they have a great alternative to go to, but I think the future certainly of Blake Bortles with the Jaguars is certainly in doubt. For me, my biggest takeaway, frankly, is I'm kind of worried about the Texans' offensive skill players, not named DeAndre Hopkins, because I think he's obviously good enough to succeed in any basically situation other than when Brock Osweiler is throwing him the ball. But basically, the offensive line is so ridiculously terrible. It wasn't that great a matchup. Everybody thinks Buffalo stinks, but their defense is fine. But really, Watson was banged up heading into this game. He doesn't run at all. 15 for 25 for 177, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. Will Fuller, I was nervous coming about Will Fuller, but it was more about Kiki QT and less about the fact that Watson doesn't have time to throw, and that's really what the issue necessarily is. Lamar Miller, the Fantasy Pros account tweeted out the writers' rest of season rankings, and I was 15 spots lower than anybody else on Lamar Miller going forward. I had him outside my top 40 because, frankly, number one, I get it. It's hard because you just can't find that many running backs who are going to see significant work. But in the end, the offensive line is so abysmal. He's losing work to Alfred Blue. Deonta Foreman comes back. Basically, if your name isn't DeAndre Hopkins, to me, man, I don't know about you, I'm not sure I really want a piece of this offense at all.
I'm a little worried about the offense as well. But that's the thing, is like, this was a concern coming into the season, so I don't want to pretend like it was new. We knew that the offensive line was terrible for the Texans, and it was like, I covered the draft a lot this offseason, and I went through like so many players, and I scouted offensive linemen, and I looked at them, and there were some offensive linemen that could have been had in the 3rd round when the Texans had their first pick, because they didn't have any picks in the first 2 rounds, so it was going to be tough for them. I was really shocked that they didn't go after any offensive linemen in free agency. It was really odd to see that, and I'm like, okay, they have to address it in the draft at some place, and they didn't. They just continually like overlooked it, and then they lost their starting right tackle to begin the season, Henderson, and it's just gone downhill. Deshaun Watson, if he's not healthy and he's not is able to escape that blitz, like, the pressure that offensive line is going to allow, it's going to lead to messy things, man. And DeAndre Hopkins, the touchdown he caught today, literally saved Deshaun Watson from having a complete disaster because, that pass was actually, it was a bad ball. And DeAndre Hopkins just snagged the ball out of thin air. And, like, honestly, maybe 1 in 100 receivers make that play. He's like the elite, and that's not a touchdown to any other receiver basically in the same zip code. So, yeah, I'm a little worried. I had someone ask me already through Twitter if I would drop Deshaun Watson for Mitch Trubisky, and the answer to that is absolutely not. Don't do that. We're going to talk about the Bears when we get there, but yeah.
Yeah, let's make it clear. That's not what I'm saying, at this point. But I'm just saying there are a lot of pieces on the Texans offense that fantasy owners have all come to rely on. And frankly, I think at this point, I said it several weeks ago, I don't think Deshaun Watson's getting out of this season basically healthy. I don't think he's going to make it through the full season. He takes so many shots. They're all over him. He can't, and he's already banged up. He's just not basically showing the escapability quite as he used to, which I think is just a product of being beaten down so much. So I'm definitely worried about pretty much everyone. I imagine that Fuller and, well, I don't know how much further Lamar Miller, but I bet, Deshaun Watson himself and everybody's going to move kind of heavily down in my rest of season rankings. So, Tags, before we get into winners and losers, I do want to remind everyone about our latest giveaway because it's pretty awesome. We're giving away the signed Davante Adams Packers helmet. Now, Tags has tweeted out. It's awesome. Just take a look at it. You can submit an entry in 30 seconds by just going to fantasypros.com/contest. Now, like all our signed giveaways, this one comes from Pristine Auction. Pristine Auction is one of our sponsors, but I am telling you guys, if you collect any memorabilia, or if you even thought about collecting memorabilia, you really need to check out the site. There is zero commitment. You can just go and browse. It doesn't cost anything to be on the site or to bid in any one of the hundreds of auctions that they have every single day. Everything they sell is guaranteed authentic from only the most trusted sources. And seriously, if you just go just even to browse, or if you go and actually start bidding, you're going to see some phenomenal deals. Just yesterday, there was a Le'Veon Bell signed Steelers jersey for $61, a signed Josh Gordon football for $36, and a Demaryius Thomas signed Broncos jersey for $77. So if you're a fan of football memorabilia, or really memorabilia from any sport, then there's really no place to go other than pristineauction.com. That's PRISTINE.com. And then there's a little how did you hear about us section. Make sure you mention that you heard about them from Fantasy Pros so we can keep doing things like the Davante Adams helmet giveaway. All right, Tags, biggest winner on the day. Go.
Biggest winner, I would say, has to be Doug Baldwin for me. Doug Baldwin, coming off a one-target game, it was very Amari Cooper-esque, and everybody was worried about it. That led me to go back and watch that game again, like really close. I watched it on Game Pass, and I watched specifically the All-22 film so I could watch Doug Baldwin running his routes. He was getting open, and there were times during that game when David Moore had his second touchdown where Doug Baldwin's running down the left sideline. He's got his arm up in the air like he's open. He had a few yard separation, could have been hit on that play. Fortunately, Russell Wilson threw a touchdown regardless, but it was only a matter of time before Doug Baldwin got back involved in this offense. So to see him see 8 of 23 targets from Russell Wilson today turned into 91 yards, all is well with Doug Baldwin. So, if you were thinking about buying Doug Baldwin, and even if his owner after the last game is still wanting a little bit more than you'd like to pay, remember that Doug Baldwin was considered like a top 36 fantasy pick before he hurt his knee in the preseason. So, I'm not saying that you should approach him as that going forward, but I think he could be bought for cheaper than he is still in the market. He's like one of those I'm willing to buy high type of guys.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I was a little concerned just because anytime you see a receiver get one target, you just, that shouldn't happen, especially with a guy like Baldwin. But I also went back and watched the film. He was wide open on several occasions. So in the end, I'm glad to see that this performance. And I do think, frankly, that the perception of him is not going to catch up to reality. I think that last week's performance is still going to be in the back of everybody's minds. And he didn't catch a touchdown today. Right. Yeah. So I think that that's going to sort of also be there. So I don't even think you're technically buying high. I think you're still basically able to buy low. I don't think that this performance is really going to move the needle as much as it probably should for fantasy owners who were doubting. For me, my biggest winner is Peyton Barber. We all sort of looked at this week as saying this is going to be the Ronald Jones coming out party. It's a great matchup. It's off a bye. But then Dirk Cutter was talking up Peyton Barber all week in practice. He got the start, and he did not disappoint. 13 for 82, plus 24 yards through the air and the touchdown. Ronald Jones did get one carry, and he does catch all 3 of his targets for 16 yards, and that's it. I mean, really, it's not anywhere close. So coming in, Tags, I don't know about you. You had Ronald Jones 37 rest of season and Barber 51st. I had Ronald Jones 45th and Barber 60th. What do you think we're going to do with these guys going forward?
Yeah, I'm still not going to let Ronald Jones back onto the waiver wire because obviously we've seen the leash that Peyton Barber has, and let's not mistake it. This was a very good matchup for Peyton Barber, so it doesn't shock me to see him play well. I did move Barber up. I have Ronald Jones at number 40 the rest of the season. Between him and someone like Derrick Henry, I'm kind of torn because I feel like Jones has much higher upside once he gets an opportunity, whereas Henry is giving you little production now. I would take someone like Marlon Mack over Ronald Jones. Yep. We'll get to him as we go through the show today. But Ronald Jones, his stock definitely took a hit. Peyton Barber moved up a little bit in my rest of season rankings, but I kind of view Peyton Barber as like a Wendell Smallwood, where it's like if these guys don't score, they're going to be useless on your fantasy team. So they have value for sure, considering the running back position is so thin. But at the same time, if you have Barber, I recommend having Jones on your team too, just because I don't believe that they're ever going to share a workload. I believe it's going to be basically one or the other. Jaquiz Rodgers didn't see a single touch today. So obviously they're moving forward with both of these guys, but one of them is going to see the bulk of the carries. And eventually I think it's going to be Ronald Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably right long term, but I think I am a little bit more bullish on Barber at this point than you are, and mainly because this was the perfect time. If you want to go to Ronald Jones, this is it. You talked about the matchup. There is no better matchup than a back against Atlanta right now, especially a back that can possibly catch passes. You're off a bye. You can game plan off it. They don't do it, and instead, Barber comes through. I mean, they lose the game, but he comes through with a big game, and that's got to buy him several weeks at this point. I agree. I'm not really ready just to let Ronald Jones get out on the wire, and I would certainly, as I've said probably a couple of weeks at this point, I would certainly drop Derrick Henry first because I really have no faith that is ever going to turn around that situation. But for me, I think I'm probably going to have Barber moving up a little more significantly than you are, just because I think if they're not going to do it right now, I don't see them doing it anytime shortly. How about your biggest loser, Tex?
Biggest loser, I mean, I mentioned Carlos Hyde last week, so I don't want to talk about him again, but seriously, he's slowly losing that job. I said it, I know he scored, and it masked what was kind of mediocre fantasy performances, like performances in general over the first few weeks, but now that he hasn't scored in 2 weeks, another tough matchup coming up next week, I think Carlos Hyde is slowly losing this job. But a couple other biggest losers I wanted to mention, Nyheim Hines, we're going to have T.Y. Hilton back soon. Eventually, I think we're going to get Jack Doyle, because I don't know why they didn't put him on IR, because it's now 5 weeks out, I think. Jack Doyle hasn't played, so I just don't. He's going to come back at some point. You had Marlon Mack come back this week. He's losing his role. He's never going to see 15 carries again like he saw against the Patriots. He's going to lose some of those targets in the passing game. Andrew Luck's volume can only go down from here. He's on a record pace right now. And then the other one is Cameron Brate. Cameron Brate was someone that a lot of people coming into the week viewed as a must play. And I was one of those people. And, fortunately he scored a touchdown, but going back and looking at the snap counts, OJ Howard, even though he got into full practice at the end of the week and said he wanted to play, I figured they were going to ease him back in because, he was essentially out for 2 weeks while they game planned for this. And he played, I think, 36 snaps to 24 for Brate. So Brate is falling back to the second favor, and his stock is going down for me.
Yeah, he catches that 15-yard touchdown pass right off the bat, and you're like, oh, great, we didn't even have to worry about the fact that Howard was in. But instead, no, that's his only catch. Howard catches a touchdown pass later in the game. And again, it was a great matchup, obviously, because Atlanta completely struggles against tight ends. But I agree, going forward, certainly, everybody kind of looked at Brate as kind of a guy who could be an every-week starter for at least a few weeks, because the initial estimate for Howard was 2 to 4 weeks. But obviously, Brate becomes, to me, pretty easily droppable. For me, my biggest loser was Kenyan Drake. I mean, there was a lot of talk this week about how Adam Gase really views Frank Gore. We've all sort of been looking at it, and it might not be fair since we have been talking about how bad the situation is for Drake for a while, but I've kept sort of waiting for it. And at this point, though, it came out and Adam Gase was just like, no, Frank Gore is our move the chains back. That's how I view him, essentially. And Drake is sort of like our pass catching guy. And that's fine. And then Gore goes out and rushes for over 100 for, the first time in this millennium or whatever. And Drake loses that critical fumble on the goal line in overtime. He basically just drops the ball. So for me, we talk about it every week, so I don't want to, belabor the point, but I have been holding out hope, essentially, that eventually Kenyan Drake, because he's so talented, that Adam Gase would wake up and it would sort of turn over the reins to him. But I just don't see that happening. It didn't sound like it was going to happen now coming into the week from the article. I think it was in the Miami Herald. And then today's performance obviously just shows that Gore is running well, by the way. I mean, to his credit, he is running well. He's always been kind of like a plotter, at least for the last couple of years. But he's running well, and so I think he's really carved out his role for a while, and that certainly fumble in overtime didn't help. But for me, Kenyan Drake is a guy who's frankly, he's the season biggest loser. But for today, he takes a hit.
I do want to say that Frank Gore did get nicked up at the end of that game. And so he came up gimpy, and, as someone at his age, that could be something bad. It's something to keep an eye on. The reason I say that is because, when they got the ball back in overtime on their game winning drive, it was Kenyan Drake in the game. It wasn't
Correct.
Frank Gore. So I think there might be something going on with Gore there. And if Gore were to miss any time, obviously Drake is going to get the lion's share of the touches there. Not that they're extremely worth a whole bunch, but at the same time, he's going to go back into fantasy viability because of all the touches he's going to get, his usability in the passing game and all that. So it's something to pay attention to for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I was under the impression, I could be wrong because I wasn't watching it that close and everything like that Gore was gassed. The announcers were talking about it just before he came out of the game the first time, that he basically looks gassed, but it obviously could have been an injury. And at that point, probably if it was simply that, he probably could have gotten it together enough, especially after that fumble, when you're right, Drake did continue to see the work during that last drive in overtime. But absent injury, I think he's going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the game recaps, buddy. Let's very briefly touch on Thursday night's, massacre. Eagles 34, Giants 13. Wentz looks great. Alshon Jeffrey scores 2 touchdowns. I'm going to ask you a pretty simple question about the Eagles. You are not limited to the current roster. Who is the most valuable running back that's going to play for the Eagles rest of season?
I think it's Corey Clement right now. Hearing what the Bills want for LaShawn McCoy is, from what I've heard, it's essentially a second-round pick, and that's just way too much. Even though if you need a running back, I still don't spend that on LaShawn McCoy. Some rumors have flirted out there about Jordan Howard potentially being a candidate for trade, but I don't see the Bears moving him because his salary is just too cheap, being a 5th-round pick. So, I think it's Corey Clement. And I know a lot of people tagged Wendell Smallwood as the one who would have the most value going forward. And even though he had the most snaps, I think it had to do with Corey Clement coming off a multi-week injury. And Doug Peterson's not the type of coach to play running backs who don't practice a whole lot. So going back to Ryan Matthews days. If Ryan Matthews didn't practice for Doug Peterson, he didn't play. So nothing really shocks me there. And Corey Clement reportedly was told by the front office, we're going to trade for a running back. You better give us a reason not to. And he played really well. Corey Clement looked really good. So he's the one I would go with. The bigger story for me in this one was the Eagles and Eli Manning's inability to do much. Odell Beckham was out there running routes. He was half-assing it. And the thing is I don't like to accuse players of but Odell Beckham didn't want to be on the field. It just didn't and I know he's doing the stuff on the sidelines and all that stuff. When I'm actually watching him when it matters, run routes, I just don't feel like the passion's there. I've seen him run routes better than he has the last few weeks. So that's not it with Odell Beckham. But here's the thing. They've paid him way too much money in order for them not to make him happy. They need to do something. And it's unfortunately, that's going to affect Sterling Shepard. It's going to affect Evan Ingram. You can't take touches away from Saquon Barkley because the dude's just a freak. It doesn't surprise me to see him do what he did on Thursday night because, if you guys listen to the podcast all offseason, I talked about Saquon Barkley, is that he was my number 3 overall player. I probably should have had him as number 2 in front of Le'Veon Bell, but I didn't. But yeah, I always had faith in the kid. But to see him play on this offense, how bad they're playing, and to know that he's still a top 3 fantasy back is just ridiculous.
He's really remarkable. I think Eli Manning commented on it in the preseason, but his legs are just preposterous.
They're tree trunks.
It's just he's like a video game right now. I was showing my son, my 5-year-old, some of the videos of him, and then I tried to show him Barry Sanders, and I was like, look, this is sort of what it's like. I was going to ask you, it sounds like you're going the other way, but I was going to ask you whether or not you have concerns about Odell Beckham, given sort of what we see, and he's basically only had really, truly elite production in one game, but it sounds like almost you think it's going to go the other way, that you think, frankly, that because of how much they paid him and because they have to make him happy, that he's just going to start getting all the targets all the time. Is that basically what you're thinking?
And honestly, that might be the best thing for them. The thing is, he has to show more effort, that's for sure. But knowing how much they paid him, yes, absolutely. He's got to be the focal point. They have to make him happy because if they don't, it's just... You kind of see it, the effect that it has. And this is really weird, right? Because we saw it last year with the Giants locker room. We saw them give up on their coach. right? Like, I've never seen anything like that. And I said it on the podcast multiple times. I said, I don't want to accuse players of giving up, but this team has given up on their team, like their coach. They've given up. And so now here we are a year later under a completely different head coach. So, I mean, is it something in the locker room? Do you think it might not be the coach? Do you think it might not have been Ben McAdoo? Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's someone that keeps going out into the media and talking and talking and talking. Maybe it's someone that's holding out and holding out. I don't know, man. Odell Beckham is a phenomenal talent, and they need to find a way to get him involved, but he also needs to go out there and put forth a better effort.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Frankly, they obviously, as everybody knows, it's really, I always find it funny, we'll move on from this game in a second, but I find it funny that their draft pick is a running back that is just absolutely preposterously incredible, and everyone is like, boy, that was a terrible pick. You know what I mean?
I don't know. And that's the thing, is like, if Saquon Barkley turns out to be a Hall of Famer, was it a terrible pick? And I think there's an argument to be had for both sides, because here's the reason. Like, if you look at what Todd Gurley does for the Rams offense, he's worth it. Like, then that's the thing. I know so many people say running backs are replaceable. There's certain running backs who are not. I think Saquon Barkley is one of those running backs, but if you have to be able to use him in the offense the way that the Rams use Gurley, the way that the Steelers use Le'Veon Bell, where it's like he has to be used in the passing game. And the thing is, it's not just used in the passing game, but use him as a decoy, line him up out wide, like use him in various ways that create opportunities for the wide receivers as well. And that's why Sean McVay is such a good head coach. Pat Shurmur might be a better offensive coordinator than he is a head coach, because this is his second go around as a head coach, and it didn't go so well the first time. I gave him, a leap of faith, just saying it could be a one-time thing, but he might just be one of those guys that's just better suited for a coordinator role.
Well, as good as Barkley is, I can say as a Jets fan that I am extremely happy that the Giants passed on Sam Darnold and did not trade out of that spot. But again, enough on the Giants, who really, frankly, we have spent way too much time talking about, given how much impact they have on the fantasy world. Vikings 27, Cardinals 17. Now look, Dalvin Cook, man, let's talk about this for a second. Latavius Murray, first of all, kudos to him. Monster day in a great matchup, 155 yards rushing and a touchdown. But Dalvin Cook, he practiced in full, I believe, on Thursday. Then he was limited on Friday. Then there was word he was going to be on a pitch count, and then he's just inactive. How concerned are you about Dalvin Cook going forward?
Extremely, because whatever's happening with him, it keeps reoccurring. So it's like, why are they even having practicing on a limited basis? Like, let him rest it. Just literally sit out for the entire week. We'll try and give it a go next week. Like, understand that this was a game that they could have won all along, in saying that we could have game planned with Latavius Murray. So I don't know, man. I'm definitely worried, and especially with these soft tissue things, like, look at Leonard Fournette. He came back, and now he's going to end up missing like 3 more weeks. So it's just like, looking at all these things going around the NFL, these soft tissue injuries for running backs, they do concern me. And knowing that Latavius Murray played well today, I mean, let's be fair, it was the Cardinals. They've allowed the most fantasy points to the running backs, going into this week. But at the same time, the fragility of Dalvin Cook could lead the Vikings to say this is a full-blown timeshare. And even when Dalvin Cook was healthy, it was a timeshare. So I have him down around Kerryon Johnson in my rest of season rankings. So I view him as a timeshare running back, and one that plays behind a pretty bad offensive line. So I'm not really too excited about Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, that offensive line is really terrible. And Kirk Cousins is playing so well because, frankly, people are in his face every second. It's basically what you wish Eli Manning could sort of do. He's really, I think, playing extremely high-quality football. And again, the thing with Cook for me is the fact that he practiced in full. And then he basically was like, nope, every day it got worse. That is a really bad sign for me. So, God, if I'm a Cook owner, and I am, unfortunately, because I was really high on him coming in, I am not in any way optimistic about the short-term future. I think he's probably going to miss next week at the Jets, I wouldn't be surprised. I think they have a bye maybe in week 9, or I might have that wrong, but at some point in the next couple of weeks, I think they probably would be wise to, at this point, just sit him out until then. And I think that's definitely a possibility. Anything else in the Vikings? Obviously, Adam Thielen, another big game. Stephon Diggs, first game at all with single-digit targets. I assume you're not concerned?
No, I'm not concerned. It was always going to be a tough matchup for him on the perimeter. Patrick Peterson is out there. Like, they have better perimeter cornerbacks. Like, Adam Thielen was always going to have a good week. I didn't know he'd have 11 catches for 123 yards and touchdown type week. But seriously, like, Adam Thielen for the rest of the season, I went through my rest of season rankings already today, and I moved him up to number 6. And man,
is he your number 1 wide receiver?
What's that?
Is he your number 1 wide receiver, or 6 as wide receiver, or 6 total?
Oh, no, number 6 wide receiver. I have him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the only receivers I'd rather take over him are Antonio Brown, Michael Thomas, Davante Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, and Julio Jones. I could actually make the argument that DeAndre Hopkins should probably fall below him, just considering everything. But I'm just telling you, man, Adam Thielen, man.
Buddy, I have him higher than you do. I'm not kidding. Like, I thought you meant number 6 overall player, because that's like, that it strikes me as too high, but it wouldn't be something crazy, because I do our trade chart basically every week, and it's based on half point PPR, so it gets a little obviously boost for someone like Thielen who has so many catches. But in the end, I have him valued right up there with Antonio Brown, slightly ahead of like Julio Jones. And what is there to doubt at this point? His targets are another 15 targets, 11 receptions, 123 yards, and the touchdown. At this point, I see very little to separate him from any of the top receivers. It's certainly not in the way that you would think. In the end, especially in any sort of format that rewards receptions, I think he's probably 1 or 2 for me going forward. But
no,
we're in the same ballpark. On the Cardinal side, obviously David Johnson finds the end zone again, but kind of 18 for 55, only 2 catches. That's pretty disappointing. Any thoughts on Christian Kirk? I mean, again, 6 receptions for 77 yards after 85 yards and a touchdown last week. Are you encouraged by this? Do you think this is going to become a thing?
I am. I mentioned that he has a connection with Josh Rosen. The two roomed together this offseason, and they've developed that connection. And Christian Kirk's going to be a big part of this offense for the future, along with Rosen. The fact that they're using him on the perimeter a lot was always worrisome to me, but he's kind of growing into a role, and he has like phenomenal chemistry. I'm going to go back and look at everything that he's done, but coming into this week, he had 9 targets from Josh Rosen. They turned into 7 catches, 113 yards, and a touchdown. He catches 6 of 7 targets today. There's really no reason not to like Christian Kirk. And then next week, they're going to be going to play the Broncos. And as you know, the Broncos have been like demolished against the pass this year. And Larry Fitzgerald's going to see Chris Harris Jr., who's their best cornerback. So Christian Kirk is definitely worth an add, in my opinion. And he's someone that you can kind of stick in, like, it's like a bye-week filler. And I think he comes with a solid floor.
Yeah, I think so too. And actually, I want to use the word encouraged loosely by Fitzgerald as well, because he did finally practice full on Friday. I think he was off the injury report, and he saw 8 targets today. Now, he only turned it into 5 for 39, but that's at least sort of something that's going to be like, okay, you're going to be viable, and certainly he's going to see Chris Harris next week, right? And that is going to free up Kirk. So in that sense, I was sort of encouraged by both, but I'm inclined to agree. Now, I'm not saying rush out there, pick up Kirk and start him every week or anything like that, but as a bye week filler, absolutely. There is certainly a connection here. And it's good to see Josh Rosen, he's not playing great, but he's certainly improving the offense as a whole. So I was certainly encouraged. So I'm inclined to agree. Christian Kirk, if he's available on your waiver wire, he's definitely be someone who you should pick up. And I'm sure you and Bobby will talk about that on tomorrow's show. Seahawks 27, Raiders 3, not as close as the score indicates. We've already talked, obviously, about Doug Baldwin. Let's talk about the Seattle running backs for a second. Chris Carson, 14 carries for 59 yards. Rashad Penny, out of nowhere, 9 carries for 43 yards, plus 2 for 27 through the air. Mike Davis still involved, 6 for 21, plus 1 catch for 5 yards through the air. Who is the most valuable Seattle running back rest of season?
Chris Carson. Chris Carson's still the one.
Yeah, I mean, Rashad Penny, by the way, did I miss it? Was there talk about the fact that, oh yeah, we're going to get him involved this week, he's finally going to be something other than a special teamer?
Yeah, I don't know if I believe anything that comes out of Seattle's mouth, to be honest with you. Like this entire, the way that they handled the entire situation is just a joke. Like the fact that they have Rashad Penny on their team is a problem. Like, I don't know what happened here. There was a disconnect, obviously, somewhere in the building, like knowing what offensive line they have, knowing the lack, the defensive players that they've lost this offseason, everything that kind of went into drafting Rashad Penny in the first round was odd. But Chris Carson looks good out there. He had a touchdown that was called back. I want to say it was due to a penalty, or he was called down. I can't remember what it was, but I was watching parts of that game here and there. It's one I'll go back and watch because it was very boring. It was a very one-sided game. Derek Carr was Derek Carr again. He actually hurt his left shoulder, and he's apparently he might miss some time. Nobody really knows right now.
There is I'll jump in there. They do have a bye next week. Obviously, they were in London, and Rappaport has already tweeted out that there's optimism that he may not miss any time.
There's also optimism that the Raiders might trade Amari Cooper. That was a rumor that Jay Glazer put out before the game started this week, saying that the Raiders are shopping Amari Cooper out there, and that would be obviously huge for his fantasy value because I feel like he's been completely underutilized, but he was someone that got hurt in the first quarter of this game. So if you see Amari Cooper with 1 target again, know that it's because he got hurt and had to leave the game. I want to say he was diagnosed with a concussion. He also had an injury based on that hit. So it's not good for him, but I don't know. There's not too much to take away from this game outside of the fact that the Raiders are still a very bad football team, and they're clearly in rebuild mode. And now that they're looking to offload, I think Carl Joseph, they're shopping him as well. They're shopping Amari Cooper. So basically, they're just looking to acquire draft picks and rebuild that entire franchise. So they're going to be another one that kind of has to rebuild on the fly, and they've made some questionable decisions too. Like, they had Darryl Worley come back from suspension, and that led them to bench Gary and Conley, who had been pretty good over the first couple weeks for Worley, and now the secondary looks like crap. I don't know. It's just the entire Raiders organization right now. Like, I'm sure Oakland at this point, you're probably happy that your team is just leaving.
You know what the Raiders should do with some of the draft picks that they're going to get? They should draft a pass rusher. Don't you think? I mean, that might be nice. Somebody who can, rush the passer.
Wouldn't be a bad thing.
If only they had one of those, somewhere along the line, they could really do something with it. All right, you're right. Nothing more to take really away from this game. It was not competitive the entire time. And Cooper left very early, by the way, just to be clear. It wasn't like it was the second half where he only had the one target. It was a vicious hit, and it was a concussion. So obviously he does have, assuming he's still on the team, he does have an extra week because of the bye to recover. So hopefully if he is still on the team, he'll be there coming in week 8. Redskins 23, Panthers 17. Kudos to Vegas. Who knows all? The initial spread I saw was the Redskins favored by a point, which I found to be ridiculous. But they always know everything. Chris Thompson and Jamison Crowder were inactive. So there were a lot, AP has a good day. Vernon Davis catches a touchdown. Paul Richardson catches a touchdown. But I'm going to channel my inner Jerry Seinfeld voice and say, what's the deal with Jordan Reed? I mean, he does see 9 targets, but just 5 catches for 36 yards. He's got 225 yards in 5 games. That's not awful for a fantasy tight end, essentially, in this day and age, because they're all garbage, but it is terrible for a healthy Jordan Reed. So what is going on, especially today, given the fact that there just weren't that many pass catchers available?
Yeah, today they just dialed back the offense. They made it very game manager-esque, and that's why we saw Alex Smith average just 4.5 yards per attempt. He threw for 163 yards, so it wasn't like Reed was ever going to have a big day anyways. So it was a very game. It was turn back the clock for Alex Smith and turn into check down guy, and it got them the win. So I guess we can't fault them too much for having him do that. But yeah, he threw his 2 touchdowns. I want to say it was. I know they came in the first half. I want to say they may have been in the first quarter, and then they just kind of took their foot off the gas. So they just threw little dump off passes and moved the ball via the run. It was an ugly game for the most part. This one. Adrian Peterson out there gutting it out, playing through multiple injuries, racking up 97 yards in this Carolina defense. It was obviously a good performance. Going back real quick though, Dan, before I forget, I saw a stat that was posted. I couldn't believe it. Did you know that Marshawn Lynch has played 2 fourth quarter snaps all season?
No, I did not know that.
2.
Well, I mean, frankly, I mean, off the top of my head, I can't remember. How many games have they been in, out of curiosity, in the fourth quarter at this point? Is it always just like, we're getting blown out, let's save him? He looks like the most miserable human being in the world, by the way. And to me, anytime you see him, I just feel like he's just angry at everything that's going on around him.
Yeah, they've lost 3 one-possession games, one to the Browns in overtime, and then you had the one to the Dolphins they lost, and then they lost to the Broncos in a 19-20 game. So they've been...
Wait, he didn't see any snaps in that Browns game?
No,
they went
2
into
fourth
overtime?
quarter snaps all season. That's crazy.
That organization at this point, and as somebody who is a Mets and Knicks fan, I can sort of speak to incompetent organizations. That one is really off the rails at this point, and it's unfortunate to watch because there's really not going to be much useful fantasy production from them at all. So sorry I didn't let you use that stat before.
No, it's okay. Seriously. But do you think Lynch would just like straight up retire in the middle of the season, or say that no? I don't think he would want to go to Philadelphia, because I would say that would be actually a logical replacement for Jay Ajayi. But I don't know if Lynch wants to play anywhere else in his career. He came back because he said he wanted to play for his hometown in Oakland. So. Right.
I think if you try to predict what Marshawn Lynch is going to do, then you're just,
good call.
It's a bad line of work to be in, because the dude is idiosyncratic to say the least. So,
for sure.
But you could see it, right? He's so miserable at this point, and it clearly, obviously, he had retired once, and he did just come back to play for his hometown. So you could see it. But either way, I mean, if I own Lynch, I'm not particularly optimistic rest of the season. Going back to this game, anything on the Panthers? It just feels like it was a huge letdown game after that enormous sort of win over the Giants, that they just basically had nothing the whole game. Is there any takeaways from this?
No, outside of the fact that Christian McCaffrey kind of went back to Christian McCaffrey, and he totaled 8 carries. But here's the crazy part is they abandoned the run altogether. That was really early on. But I looked through it. He's now totaled 105 of the Panthers 126 running back touches this year. That's 83.3%, which is ridiculous. He saw every single running back touch for them this week. They're going to be playing the Eagles next week, so it's like they're going into Philadelphia to play in that place where they have been really good at home, their defense. So I don't I don't know, man. Christian McCaffrey was always someone that worried me as someone that people were looking at as like, oh, he's an elite RB1, draft him at the end of the first round. I was never one to fall into that trap. I felt like he was a solid second round pick. He was safe, but he was never going to win you your fantasy league. And I think you guys are seeing that now. The only really, really big game he had was against the Bengals, who, by the way, they were missing Vontaze Burfict. They were down like, I think 3 defensive tackles by the end of that game. So like their front seven was just gutted. So to see him perform in that game, he still doesn't have a rushing touchdown this year. He just needs to get it done through the passing game. And so Christian McCaffrey, he kind of is who we thought he was.
Yeah, no, it's obviously a different story, although he is who we thought he was in any league that rewards points per reception, half point, or regular point. He's obviously got an enormously high floor there. But yeah, you don't really know what you're going to get. He's not somebody who, you plug into your lineup and you're like, great, I can guarantee myself and sit here and think of over 100 total yards. So I agree with that. Greg Olsen does return, looks healthy, 7 targets, 4 catches for 48 yards. So do just want to point that out. Falcons 34, Bucs 29. We touched on this game a little bit, but looking on the Falcon side, Calvin Ridley, just to get it out of the way, leaves early with an ankle injury, had 3 catches for 47 yards. Now he's getting an MRI tomorrow, but it does sound like he was walking around on it and looked okay. They do get an extra day of rest before next week because they play on Monday Night Football in a great matchup against the Giants. So we'll check in on that. Everybody, basically a pass catcher for Atlanta, has a good day. Sanu catches a touchdown pass. Austin Hooper, 9 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, you will hear ranting about how Julio Jones did not score a touchdown because people will be unhappy with his 10 catches for 143 yards. But really, the running game is kind of where I want to ask you about because obviously with Devonta Freeman out, Tevin Coleman disappoints, just 10 for 35. And Ito Smith gets 11 carries, just 22 yards, but he does find the end zone for the 3rd straight game. So, I mean, assuming Devonta Freeman is out next week against the Giants, I'm not going to hold you to it, but ballpark for me, you think your ranking of both Tevin Coleman and Ito Smith
against the Giants next week?
Yes, correct. Just for next week, assume Devonta Freeman's out. Where are you ranking both these guys? I mean, Ito Smith, and the reason I'm asking is because Ito Smith, I mean, Coleman's not doing all that much, and Smith has now found the end zone 3 straight weeks.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair question, but I mean, when you look at the Giants and you look at like what opposing teams have been able to do against them, I think there's now 4 running backs in the year who have totaled 17 or more touches. I think this is a week where they kind of have to go with Tevin Coleman a bit more, just because it's like they need to establish a run game and kind of give the passing game a little bit of a break. And the matchup against the Giants kind of calls for that. It was really odd last week to see Alshon Jeffrey. I should have mentioned that in the Thursday night game, but Alshon Jeffrey wasn't shadowed by Janoris Jenkins, which was really questionable on the Giants' part. I didn't understand what they were doing. But yeah, I mean, I probably will have Tevin Coleman as like a high-end RB2, and Ito Smith will be kind of like in that Eckler territory where he's like, a low-end RB3, the one that's probably going to see 7 to 10 touches. And I'm not going to bank on him scoring all the time because he's not seeing very many touches like every single week. So he's one of those guys that he'll give you a decent floor, I think, but he's not someone that I really must play or anything like that.
No, I think that's fair. He's certainly not a must play, but I do think I'm probably going to have him a little higher than you are because I think this is a real thing. For whatever reason, I think they like him around the goal line. Now, again, we don't know that Devonta Freeman's out. There's a lot of uncertainty, at least for me. I don't know if you have any more Intuit tags about Freeman's injury. It was called a bone contusion in his foot. That doesn't sound like something that necessarily is long-term, but he's obviously been out for most of the season at this point. But for me, yeah, I mean, Coleman, I agree. He's got to be an RB2 just because it's a good matchup and he's going to get certainly most of the carries, but Ito Smith, I mean, he got more carries, frankly, than Coleman did. So, I'm inclined to, I want to take a close look at the situation, but it is somebody who I think if you're in a bye week pickle and something like that, definitely don't ignore Ito Smith. On the Bucs, look, we talked about the tight ends. We talked about the running backs. Is there anything else you want to say about them?
I did want to say that Chris Godwin, it was a really big takeaway of mine, was that it's his first game playing with Jameis Winston this season. Obviously, they were coming out of the bye week. I wanted to see how they used him in the game. And he tied a team high, 9 targets. Caught 6 of them for 56 yards and a touchdown. He was their most productive fantasy wide receiver. So, I mean, Godwin, it's good because we saw towards the end of 2017, Chris Godwin and Jameis Winston have a rapport on the field, and it kind of continued where they kind of picked up where they left off. So Chris Godwin is, with the way that the Tampa Bay defense is continually allowing points, they're just bleeding points to everyone. That's not going to stop because when you look at the secondary, they just don't have the tools to get it done. It's not like they're just missing a couple players and once they come back, they're going to be better. No, they're like, it's like we have the Rams, then we have the Falcons who are kind of like the Rams light version, and then we go down to the Bucs who are kind of like the Falcons light version. So we have Chris Godwin there is someone, even though he was 3rd on the team in snaps at the wide receiver position, position today, it's still a role. They're going to go 4 wide a lot more often than most teams do. So I think you'll continue to see production out of him. It's not going to be like consistent every single week, but once you get outside like the top 20 wide receivers, not many of them are.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the thing that sort of sometimes fantasy owners don't realize. When you're choosing basically between the low end number 2 wide receivers and, basically anybody from, wide receiver 3, maybe into the high end wide receiver 4, it's not that different.
Mm-hmm.
It's largely a toss up because you never know what someone's going to do, essentially, when you get down to that range. Deshaun Jackson also sees 9 targets, which I thought was a really good sign. He has his classic sort of 77 yards game. It strikes me as like that's his number. He has that number of receiving yards every game pretty much. But at this point, everybody, Mike Evans is a little disappointing, but, obviously nothing to worry about. So certainly something that there's going to be a lot of goodness in the pass catching of the Tampa Bay Bucs.
For sure.
Texans 20, Bills 13. Now, Josh Allen leaves the game with an injury, and so Nathan Peterman comes in and does Nathan Peterman.
Yep.
I'm not sure of the severity of the injury. But obviously none of it matters because nobody on Buffalo is worth playing outside of LaShawn McCoy, who has a relatively productive game, 16 carries for 73 yards, plus 3 catches for 21 yards. Anything you want to say on the Buffalo side of the ball?
No, outside of the fact that Kelvin Benjamin shouldn't have even been playing. Like, seriously, if I was the coach, the thing is, that's why I'm not an NFL coach, I guess. I can't manage the personalities, but apparently there was a story of multiple reporters said that before the game, Josh Allen, it was like about 2 hours until the game, Josh Allen went over to Kelvin Benjamin and said, hey, could you come catch passes with me? I want to go warm up on the field a little bit. Kelvin Benjamin just straight up said no.
I did read that as well. I assume that's true, obviously. And yeah, I don't really think that you should be doing that. I don't think that's a good sign for your future, frankly, in the NFL. But yeah, unfortunately, he was not, and it did not make much of a difference. I believe he had 2 catches, as usual, not putting in a great effort. The Texans, look, I talked about them a lot in my biggest takeaway of the day. Anything else you want to say about them?
No, I thought Lamar Miller would have a better game than he did. I know the offensive line is bad, but I thought he'd be used more in the passing game than he was. Just saw 3 targets. Kiki QT, 5 targets. But when you look at it and you see Deshaun Watson had just 25 pass attempts in the game, there's only so much volume to go around. And this was always my concern coming to this. The Bills defense has played so much better over the last 3 or 4 weeks. They're starting to come around, like so much better than I thought they would be. That defense is keeping them in games, and Josh Allen has done his part in like not completely losing the game for them, but Nathan Peterman kind of fixed that and rectified the situation this week. So the Houston defense was like the number 1 play on the board, and obviously that one came through. So
yeah,
but yeah, it's just worrying about the volume of this offense because they want to slow it down. They don't want to throw the ball 40 times per game, and the only time that's going to happen is if you have a team that's able to put up 30 points in the Texans, and the Bills were just not one of those teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Nathan Peterman, man, really, it's insane that guy's in the NFL. I'm certainly not one to talk, but it does definitely look like when you watch him, you can't imagine how this is possible. Also, by the way, to be clear, Tyrod Taylor was benched for him at one point. At one point, coaches thought that Nathan Peterman gave them a better chance to win than anybody else in the NFL, which is just very strange. Dolphins 31, Bears 28 in overtime. All right, so here's what I'm going to do, Tags, okay? This game was obviously played in Bizarro World, so I don't really think there's much I can sort of say about it, so I'm just going to set the game up so that our listeners know what happened, and then you can just go ahead and talk about whatever you want to talk about because I know you're dying inside. So here we go. Ready? Ryan Tannehill was inactive with a shoulder injury, and Brock Osweiler came in and threw for a career-high 380 yards and 3 touchdowns. Albert Wilson went for 155 yards and 2 scores. Frank Gore had over 100 yards, as I said earlier, rushing for the first time in quite a while. Jordan Howard lost a fumble on the goal line. Kenyan Drake lost a fumble on the goal line. And Taylor Gabriel was the Bears' leading receiver with 110 yards. Tags, say whatever you want to say about this game.
The Bears' defense didn't show up. And that's on multiple fronts. They didn't have a single sack on Brock Osweiler, which is pathetic considering, the offensive line of Miami is like one of the lesser ones in the NFL. The Bears came into that game leading the NFL in sacks. They didn't get any. Their secondary was atrocious. Like running after the catch was like the name of the game. Albert Wilson on his touchdown that tied the game to push it into overtime. That was it was like basically a slant pass that he took like 70 some yards to the house. And the Bears the defenders just didn't know what was going on. Eddie Jackson had a bad game. Adrian Amos had a bad game. game. The Bears defense just looked bad. And here's the thing. This is for fantasy takeaway. I want you guys to know that Mitch Trubisky, if you look at the stat sheet, it looks really good. 316 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, 10.2 yards per attempt, a 122.5 quarterback rating. And if you look at Mitch's actually quarterback rating on the season, I think he's probably top 5 now in terms of his quarterback rating. His numbers look good, but his numbers look so much better than he's actually played. Mitch had a terrible first half. He had an ugly interception in the red zone. He's making some throws that make you that make you feel like, wow, this kid could be something. And then he's making some throws where you're just like, good Lord, man, what are you doing? But again, if you have Mitch Trubisky on your team and you're able to trade him coming off of a 6 touchdown performance and a 3 touchdown performance, I would do that. Like, trade him for Baker Mayfield right now if you can do that. He's just not someone that's going to be a consistent fantasy performer, and that's going to bleed into the wide receivers like Allen Robinson, who has only seen 7 targets, I want to say, once this season. So he's just like, the lower volume is going to affect it, and Jordan Howard is kind of like a hold for me. I know some people are saying that he's garbage and that it's not going to work in this offense. I think it's a work in progress with Jordan Howard, and I think they've had trouble installing him in the shotgun formation, like where he just doesn't run as well out of the shotgun. He runs better in an I with a fullback in front of him, but they've had the fullback inactive for multiple weeks now. So I think the Bears have some learning to do. I think Matt Nagy has some learning to do. Unfortunately, the bye week has already passed. So the fantasy takeaways here is sell Mitch Trubisky off the big numbers that he's put up the last couple weeks and try and turn him into something. Jordan Howard is a hold. Tariq Cohen he's a playmaker. He's always been. He's not going to produce this way every single week. That's where I'm at. And that the Bears receivers are just going to be a little bit up and down considering Trubisky's, inconsistency.
Feel better, buddy?
Not really. We still lost to the Dolphins, and that hurts. And I mean, the thing is, the reason that it hurts so much is because the Dolphins, this was a game that we obviously should have won even if Tannehill played. But now the Bears have to go back home and play the Patriots next week. So it's like if you won this game, you could at least walk in and say, okay, the worst case scenario, we're going to be 4-2 after playing the Patriots, which wouldn't have been a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, look, my therapy session obviously failed. I thought Tags would really just work his way through it and then feel totally better once he got all of that off his chest, but he's still clearly struggling with it. But it's all right, buddy. Don't worry about it. They just didn't show up. They probably took for granted. They'll be fine next week. They're going to beat the Patriots. No problem whatsoever. Chargers 38, Browns 14. The Chargers offense is just awesome, man. Melvin Gordon, preposterous. 3 touchdowns. So he's awesome. Talk to me about Keenan Allen for a second. Because of the rushes, he had like 40 yards rushing or something like that, 41. He does top 100 total yards, but just 6 targets, 4 catches, 62 yards. So he has 9 or more. He had 9 or more targets in 11 of 16 games last year, but just 3 of 6 this year. He topped 100 yards receiving 7 times last year, just once this year. Are you concerned about Keenan Allen? You had him 10th rest of season coming into the game. Are you concerned at all about him?
No, I still have him at 10th. I still consider him a buy. Like I said, I think the vital signs with him are good when it comes to his quarterback play. Like Phillip Rivers only threw the ball 20 times today. So to see Keenan Allen finish with 100 yards, I think we should feel pretty lucky to walk away with that. As you mentioned, the targets it hasn't been as high of amount, but at the same time, his targets are still solid. He's still, I want to say, top 10 in the NFL when it comes to targets per game among wide receivers. So the volume is there. Eventually, touchdowns will follow. It's kind of like Julio Jones. We've seen these guys perform before, and it will get back on track when Melvin Gordon's not scoring, 3 touchdowns a game, and then Tyrell Williams, scoring 2 touchdowns. Tyrell Williams, some people are going to wonder, what's the takeaway here? Do I go pick him up? No, he's still yet to see more than 5 targets in a game. This could have just as easily been a Mike Williams 2-touchdown game, but Mike Williams saw a lot of Denzel Ward. So Tyrell Williams had a good game. That's going to happen from time to time, but he's not going to be someone you want to rely on. I still say that you should buy low on Keenan Allen.
Yeah, I agree. I think I have him maybe 12th or 13th rest of season, but it's right around there. And I agree. And I remember last season, he didn't get off to a great start either.
Nope.
I mean, he was fine, right? And then in the second half of the season, he just completely dominated.
No, right? Nobody remembers that, but I'm so glad you brought that up. So last year, I think it was through 9 weeks of the season last year, Keenan Allen was the number 29 wide receiver, if I'm not mistaken. And everybody viewed him as a bust. And I was like, okay. And then all of a sudden, it's like, what happened? Like a light switch came on, and all of a sudden, Keenan Allen started lighting up the scoreboard. That's going to happen at some point, and then people are going to be like, oh man, I sold too low on Keenan Allen, and people are going to consider him like a top 5 wide receiver. I feel like I'm even keel on him. I feel like I know that it's going to even out at some point, and you're going to get some big performances. So having him at number 10, right in front of Mike Evans in that range, I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I agree. Do not sell Keenan Allen. I'm not worried at all. It's been a little frustrating, but frankly, I agree with you, Tags, completely. I would certainly hold. On the Brown side of the ball, again, you mentioned Carlos Hyde. I feel like it was a good week for your Brown takes, man. You had Carlos Hyde as the loser last week, and you obviously had a poor game this week. You talked up David Njoku this week. He goes 7 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. Anything else you want to talk about with the Browns?
David Njoku is still buy, man. Like, buy him right now. Like, I don't care he scored a touchdown. Seriously, I have him as my number 6 tight end for the rest of the year. His schedule upcoming is it's stuff you legitimately dream of. I was looking at it before we started recording. He's going to play the Bucs next week, which is they're the worst in the league. Then he's going to play the Steelers, who are the second worst in the league. Then he's going to go to play the Chiefs, who are the third worst in the league, and then he plays the Falcons after that.
Yeah,
Baker Mayfield
absolutely.
and David Njoku and Jarvis Landry, buy them all.
Yeah, I agree. Landry is a little, he's getting the targets, but he really hasn't had the receptions with Mayfield as a starter. But the targets, honestly, he's got 29 targets in 3 games. He's going to be fine with the matchups coming up. So don't be too worried about Jarvis Landry at all. The only other thing I'll mention is Duke Johnson. They talked about getting him more involved. He didn't have that many touches. He only had 6 touches overall, but he obviously had 73 yards receiving and 36 yards rushing. So at least it is something where maybe he opens some eyes and they'll really make an effort to get him the ball more, which is what you'd like to see. Jets 42, Colts 34, best day. Isaiah Crowell comes back to earth, obviously, just 13 for 40 on the ground. He does have 2 catches. Bilal Powell is 16 for 59. This is what it is, man. I mean, you're going to have the very occasional giant performance from one or both of them, frankly. But in the end, this is kind of what you're going to be around. You're going to be around 60 yards, frankly. For both of them, they're going to split work almost equally. The shine has been off Quincy Enunwa a little bit from last week, and he leaves early with an ankle injury. I don't know the severity of it. In his place, Jermaine Kersey's 10 targets, has 9 catches. Terrell Pryor with 5 catches and a touchdown. Do we care? What do you want to take away from the Jets game?
Not too much. The schedule is going to go back to the worst side for the pass catchers, so I don't want people taking away from this that Robbie Anderson or Terrell Pryor or Jermaine Kearse is all of a sudden going to become a must play. The last 2 weeks they've had really good matchup against Denver and Indianapolis. So to be honest, the passing game should have been inflated. And if you can sell someone like Robbie Anderson, I'd probably do that because I want to say like the next 3 matchups are not very good for them. So it's not a team that I feel is going to offer you much consistency. And Dan, I'm sure you can speak to that because, I mean, it's just a team like Sam Darnold's going to be an inconsistent rookie quarterback. That's just going to happen. Isaiah Crowell is a very, boomer bust running back. That's what he's turned into, where it's like if he's not breaking those long runs, he's not doing much. He had 1 run of 21 yards today, but 19 yards on the other 12 carries. So it's like these are players that I try and rid myself from in fantasy. And the reason I do that is because we play a weekly game. And when you get to the playoffs, you don't want to rely on those players. Like Amari Cooper will kill you. That's the truth of the matter. While playing, getting a guy that's getting 1 target one game and then 10 targets the next, that will destroy you come playoff time. So you kind of have to prepare for that. So I don't really want many Jets on my team.
No, you shouldn't, nor should you really want to be a Jets fan. I am born into it, so I can't really get around it. But other than that, avoid the Jets pretty much entirely. Look, Crowell and Bilal Powell, because they're going to see roughly 15 touches a game, are certainly startable guys, but don't get too excited about them and certainly not too excited about any of the pass catchers. On the other side of the ball, Andrew Luck throws 4 touchdowns basically in garbage time. Eric Ebron finds the end zone again. You can talk about them if you want, but I assume based on what you talked about with Hines being one of your losers, that you want to talk a little bit about Marlon Mack, who goes 12 for 89 plus a catch for 4 yards.
Marlon Mack looked really good.
He did.
And that's the thing is like, I don't want to take too much away from one performance, but here's what he did on the field, right? Behind that Colts offensive line that was missing 3 starting offensive linemen, and Ryan Kelly, their center, is even dinged up. He was questionable for the game. So they basically had Quentin Nelson was their one healthy starting offensive lineman. Marlon Mack you're never going to gain consistent yardage behind that offensive line. But what Marlon Mack brings to the table is he brings athleticism that allows him to juke out defenders' ways, and he could bounce a run outside and maybe make something where there is nothing, where it's like Nyheim Hines he doesn't have the athletic ability to do that. The same thing with Robert Turbin, who left that game dinged up. Jordan Wilkins didn't see, I don't even know if he was active for this game, but he didn't see a single touch. So Marlon Mack, they clearly waited until he was 100% this time. They put him back on the field and it showed. He showed burst. He had burst in the way that he ran the ball. And with the way that Andrew Luck is throwing the ball, it should open up some things. I don't think they want Luck to continue to throw the ball at a record-breaking pace. As of right now, I think he's on pace for like 730 passing attempts, which is just out of this world crazy. So, Marlon Mack is definitely a winner for me. I think you can consider him an RB3 at worst going forward.
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably going to be a little higher on him, probably a low-end RB2, I feel like, especially as they continue to get healthier, and especially whenever T.Y. Hilton comes back, I think it will open up the offense more. But I watch this game closely, obviously, because I'm a Jets fan, and I do think that Mac looked fantastic. So I'm very encouraged by him. Steelers 28, Bengals 21. A really exciting game. It was kind of a down game for Antonio Brown, which was saved by the long catch and run touchdown at the end. That was basically the game winner. But I want to talk about the running backs tags. Tell me, James Conner with a monster day could have had 3 touchdowns basically. I don't know.
Yeah, he fell down.
Mike Tomlin had challenged that.
He probably would have lost it.
I think that's probably right. It would have stood wherever. But 19 for 111 yards, 2 touchdowns, plus 17 yards through the air. Look, Le'Veon Bell, there was a report today that Le'Veon Bell has not been in touch with the Steelers yet. Obviously, he's supposed to report this week. But, talk to me about where you have the two of those guys going forward.
James Conner is nothing more than a high-end handcuff for me. I'm buying the whole Le'Veon Bell thing. I always wondered if it was like a PR thing where they got, they kind of said that in regards to like trying to increase his trade value, where it's like if Le'Veon Bell was willing to report in week 8 for the Steelers, he'd come play for your team earlier. And I thought it could have been a potential PR move, but at the same time, do you really want to risk that? Like with James Conner, do you want, if someone offers you something for him, like let's say that the Le'Veon Bell owner out there, you didn't trade Conner to him, but now it's like he has a reason. You have everything to lose here, right? You almost have nothing to gain, because best case scenario, you get him for what, 2 more weeks? And what is that really going to do for your fantasy team? I personally would trade James Conner away right now if I could for anything. If you own Le'Veon Bell, obviously don't. Hang on to him, because therefore you have the solution. You have a starting running back no matter what happens. I have that in a couple leagues. But yeah, James Conner is someone he's fallen down my list to where like he's behind guys like Peyton Barber rest of the season for me. Yeah,
so again, nobody really knows, right? We're just sort of using whatever our sort of best read on this situation is. But I'm much more bullish on Conner than you are, and than most people I think in the industry are. I don't know what's going to happen with Bell. I don't know if he's going to return this week necessarily for the bye week. I don't know if he's still just going to come back at week 10. I don't know if it's possible that he's going to get traded. But at this point, remember when Bell sat out all of the training camp last year, and then he came in and he really was not good for the first 2 or 3 weeks. I don't think even if he returns that he's just going to come in and he's just going to be Le'Veon Bell getting an enormous amount of touches. I think probably your worst case, and this is just my opinion, I think worst case is that Conner is going to stay pretty heavily involved for several weeks at the worst case. And I think that would mean that both guys would necessarily have value. Now, look, if you can get something, it depends on what you're sort of being offered for James Conner at this point. But I'm not giving him away. I'm not looking at him as just a high-end handcuff. I'm looking at him as somebody who I think is going to be able to start for my fantasy team, relatively, at a relatively decent level going forward. So obviously, Tags and I disagree there. I think I'm probably more in the minority, but I'm willing to hold on to him.
Here's something that I think everybody needs to keep in mind. If you're in a keeper league, trade for James Conner, because James Conner, I do believe, is the starting running back for the Steelers in 2019. Therefore, if you trade for him, he probably went undrafted. Actually, it just depends on when you held your league held their draft, because the whole Le'Veon Bell thing when that happened. But you might have James Conner to keep for like a 10th round pick. And that's a no-brainer if he's the starting running back for the Steelers, because I'm pretty sure that Le'Veon Bell and them are getting divorced after this year. That's happening. So I would trade for James Conner in that and just pretend, you could just tell the owner, I just think that I don't think Bell's coming back or whatever, and trade for James Conner in a league like that.
Yeah, no, that's certainly fair. In anything beyond just this year, certainly Conner has high value. But going forward this year, who knows really at this point? Obviously, Tags and I have given you different perspectives. But we'll see going forward. On the Bengals side of the ball, Tags, please tell me you've moved Tyler Boyd into your top 30. Because if not, I'm going to come over there and I'm just going to do it for you, and you're not even going to know. And it's just going to be like, wow, look at that. I didn't realize I had him that high. Where is Tyler Boyd rest of season? You had him 39th coming into this week.
I have him at 32 right now. And I understand making the case to why he should move up even more. I really do. But at the same time, it's like, I started looking at it, and it's like Andy Dalton, if you consider Tyler Boyd to continue to produce on the level that he's been, which I don't think anybody's saying that he will by saying that he should be a top 30 receiver, but right now he's a top 10 fantasy wide receiver, and Andy Dalton is on pace for 37 touchdowns. Andy Dalton has thrown more than 25 touchdowns twice in his career. Like once it was 27, the other time was 33. he hasn't become like a different quarterback. Like Andy Dalton's still Andy Dalton. He's going to have some regression, and you're going to have some weeks with Tyler Boyd where he's really going to hurt your fantasy team. But at the same time, as we've talked about on the show, nobody outside the top 20 is going to have weeks like every week. Like I'm looking at John Brown in my rankings right now. John Brown, 33 yards today, I think he had. You go down to Will Fuller. I think he also might have had 33 yards. You go down to Corey Davis. Corey Davis had 1 catch today. Marvin Jones. Like these are names that I could understand why people would say they'd take Tyler Boyd over them, but at the same time, don't just automatically jump to the conclusion. I think Tyler Boyd is more of a sell high in fantasy football right now, just because I think that he can return wide receiver 2 value in a trade.
Yeah, I don't really think I agree. I mean, I don't think I think you have him 32. My guess is I'm probably going to have him roughly 8 spots higher than you. I had him 29 coming into this week, so he's obviously going up. I'm just more of a believer, man. I think that this offense is what it is at this point. They get the Chiefs next week. That's going to be a good game. So, to me, I'm willing to value Boyd as somebody who I think is going to produce for me basically week in, week out. I mean, I'm sure there will be 1 or 2 games where he'll just deliver that 33-yard performance. But overall, I feel a little more bullish on him than you do, buddy. I'm going to be honest with you. So for me, I'd probably stick with him. So we're running a little long tag. So we're going to go through these last 3 games, which, by the way, we're all still playing when we started, the podcast. So we don't have full reaction yet. But we're going to go through them at lightning speed. Rams 23, Broncos 20. Just go ahead and give me obviously Cooper Kupp is carted off and then returns during the game, which was just pretty awesome for everyone, frankly, for fantasy football players, for Kupp, for the Rams, everybody. But give me your takeaways from this game.
Todd Gurley's a god. There's nothing else to say there. I mean, 208 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. Like he was just basically doing whatever he wanted. Jared Goff obviously struggled without Cooper Kupp in the lineup, and Kupp didn't catch a single pass, so that hurt. But he's got other weapons to go to. I mean, this Rams offense can beat you in so many different ways. Even though Goff had an off day, completing just half of his passes, didn't throw a single touchdown, they still win on the road. There's just too many ways this offense can beat you right now.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, does Vance Joseph, does he hang on to his job for another week?
Hey. I think for another week, yes. They hung with him. Obviously, they didn't get blown out or anything like that, which I think would probably be the only reason that he would actually lose his job right now. But he's certainly on the hot seat, and essentially, if he doesn't win next week or on Thursday, I think at the Cardinals, then I think he's probably gone. But yeah, there's really not much. Obviously, Emmanuel Sanders does score the touchdown. Demaryius Thomas scores the garbage time touchdown. But, there's nothing to get overly excited about with the Broncos offense. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, Phillip Lindsay with 4 carries for 18 yards. That's that's scary for people that are big time Phillip Lindsay supporters. Like you want to see Royce Freeman getting more work because he's been the better, I don't want to say better running back, but he's been equally as good. They should run the ball a lot more than they actually do. But the fact that they still have Devontae Booker involved, and I feel like this team does need a new coaching staff, that they need an overhaul, and Case Keenum's probably going to get benched. It's getting really close to the point where he's going to get benched for Chad Kelly, and I don't know if if all those on Twitter are going to get their wishes granted or whatever. I mean, I don't think that he's like a game changer. I don't think he's like a franchise quarterback that can be like plug and play, and all of a sudden it's like, why wasn't this guy starting all along? But right. Case Keenum has obviously struggled.
Yeah, frankly, if you do want Vance Joseph to be fired, I think really Devontae Booker still getting touches is really exhibit A in your case that you want to present to get rid of it, because it's preposterous at this point. We talked about this one, tags a little bit, but Cowboys 40, Jaguars 7. I mean, look, great game by the Cowboys. Obviously, Ezekiel Elliott scores a touchdown. Dak Prescott throws for 2 and runs for 1. Cole Beasley catches 2 touchdowns. What do you want to say on the Cowboys side?
Nothing.
That's good enough. That's good enough.
It's kind of like the Jets, like to where it's like, I don't think I want to, I mean, outside of Ezekiel Elliott, I don't want to own anybody on this team. And Michael Gallup was someone like I always wanted to own because I felt like eventually he'd turn into something. He's not even doing that. Like he's playing most of the snaps now, and he's still not doing anything. Like he hasn't developed a relationship with Dak. Cole Beasley's going to have these performances, every now and then, but to see him 101 yards and 2 touchdowns, it's like, I'm not buying that. Like, are you starting Cole Beasley next week? I know I'm not.
No.
So yeah, there's not much to take away there. On the Jacksonville side, we talked about this. We talked about the Jags offense a lot on the DFS podcast because Bobby was asking about Bortles and Yeldon being values, and I was always worried in this game that it would be a very low volume game for the Jaguars offense and for the Cowboys in that matter too. I didn't think the Cowboys would put up 40 points. I didn't think they'd put up 23 points, to be fair. But man, this Jags offense, this is basically 2 teams that ideally you only have parts of their running backs. That's it. Because You cannot trust Keelan Cole more than 20% of the time. You can't trust D.D. Westbrook more than 20% of the time. Like, it's just like, it's ugly, man.
I so desperately wanted Keelan Cole to be a thing. I mean, I legitimately drafted him, I think, in every league. I just had such high hopes, after all the talk about how last year he didn't even know the offense and yet he was still making plays. But no, you can't own a pass catcher on this team. It just doesn't make sense, frankly. Bortles is just terrible. And frankly, even if one of them goes off, you are never going to know which one it is. It doesn't matter. That's the problem. It could be Westbrook. It could be Cole. It could be Moncrief. So at this point, I agree. That's really all you want to do is the running backs. In the final game of the week, Baltimore 21, Tennessee 0. I believe that I heard a stat that the Ravens set a franchise record in sacks.
Yeah, 11 sacks.
11 sacks, and that's a franchise record, I believe, which is saying something considering the vaunted defenses that they had. Alex Collins finds the end zone twice. Is it just a matter of game flow with Collins? If they're in a positive game script, is he going to get all the work that he did in this game?
You want to say that. You definitely want to say that, and it really helps to see that the Buck Allen had one carry this game. He caught 3 passes for 18 yards, but they had Gus Edwards playing behind Alex Collins. So I don't know if Buck Allen's in the doghouse, and if he is, that's really good for Alex Collins. I had Collins as a decent RB2 play this week just because I figured the volume would be there. I actually picked the Ravens to win this game. I picked the under and all that stuff. So I kind of picked this game as it was supposed to go, but it's always worrisome with Collins because it feels like every time I have a grip on what his role is and how they want to use him, it's like I'm wrong. This was the first week where I felt good and I got it right, but I know it could go very like the other way next week. I want to say they're playing the Saints. So
that's correct.
That's a Saints run defense that's played a lot better than people realize. The Saints have still yet to allow more than 69 yards to any running back on the ground. And knowing that Alex Collins he didn't catch a pass today, that's worrisome for his role next week. So it's like, it's just like a weekly thing with him. But again, talking about running backs too, once you get outside the top, 12 running backs, it's like you put guys like Jordan Howard and Alex Collins to that conversation because it's like, it's hard to find guys that you feel better about than them.
I think that's the problem. Once you get to that range, there's nobody you just don't feel good about anybody at that range. So seeing Collins have a big day today, heading the 2 touchdowns, not fumbling, basically any day without a fumble is a good day for Alex Collins is how I kind of view it. So certainly trending up, although the matchup next week may not be perfect for him. Anything you want to say about the Titans who legitimately did 0 on offense at all? I mean, you can just throw this game out as a terrible game or what?
Yeah, no, I didn't want to start Corey Davis. I talked about that on the podcast throughout the week, saying that the Baltimore defense is really good. They matched up extremely well with Tennessee. Like, there was no mismatch that Tennessee could exploit in this game. And Marcus Mariota, the way he's been playing recently, there's no way that you could sit here and say that he was going to overcome a lot of this stuff. And, Bobby got into it with Titans Twitter, man. And like they started coming at me and I'm like, just leave me alone. Like, seriously, like, and like we're now at the point where it's now it's a 24 game sample size for Marcus Mariota, where he's thrown I think it's 17 touchdowns and 21 or 22 interceptions. He's just played extremely bad over the last, year and a half of his sample size. That's what we have to judge him on. And is his arm still bothering him? I don't know. But here's my issue with this, Dan. It didn't seem to be bothering him against Philadelphia when he was throwing 3 touchdowns that game, did it?
Nope.
So what all of a sudden it got bad? Like, I hate it when there's a built-in excuse for players, and especially if we hadn't seen him have that game against Philadelphia, it'd be like, okay, maybe it is bothering him, and that's fine. I believe injuries obviously can affect quarterbacks, especially when it's their throwing elbow. However, when I see you throw for 3 touchdowns and all of a sudden, it just suddenly got worse when I had a bad game, you can't do that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm not in on any Titan whatsoever at this point this season. So I'm certainly inclined to agree. I did miss the Bobby Twitter war.
Oh, it was bad, man.
Ooh. All right, I'm gonna go back and check it out then at some point. All right. Well, look, Tags, thanks again. I'm you powered through despite that it was game, ugly. So I really appreciate it. And that is it for today's show. Before we go, I do want to remind everyone to go to fantasypros.com/contest to get entered into the signed Davante Adams helmet giveaway. And I do want to say a quick thank you again to the sponsor of today's show, Pristine Auction. Remember that they have a ton of great items up for auction every day, so make sure to check them out at pristine.com. On behalf of everyone here at Fantasy Pros, thanks for listening and enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.